So if we move now into the actual elements of crafting stories, it's so important to recognize that this space creates a lot of tension and anxiety. I've got thousands of people watching me from all over the world who've never seen me before and have no idea who I am. And you are all judging me. You have the power to rate me. You have the power to absolutely destroy anything that I say. And you get to walk away and not ever think of that feedback or evaluation or comment ever again. And yet, how many of our individuals with lived experience who look at that feedback own it in a way that they shouldn't? How many people are taking your comments and focusing in on it or ruminating on it and unable to step away from it, from whatever it is that you've said, and you're a name on a piece of paper if they're lucky? So those 5-star ratings that we're so desperate to get become a part of our identity and can keep us from feeling fully recognized or fully seen. And there's so many elements there. While you're participating and watching, are you recognizing that I'm a full person standing in front of you, being emotionally vulnerable, taking a large risk, trying to help in some way through this experience that has shaped a part of who I am, and sharing it out for the world to poke and prod and determine it's inadequate? Those evaluations that we're all looking for and have to do are much more significant when we're talking about individuals who are leading with their lived experience. And I want you all to remember that time and again when you're standing or sitting in spaces where you are encountering people who are sharing their stories. We have to acknowledge that as audience members, but also as lived experience leaders. It's important for us to know what we are stepping into. I can't tell you how many times I kept thinking about what was said and how I shouldn't have said that one line because that one person out of 1,000 didn't understand what I was trying to really emote or help them to see. And that one comment kept bothering me. And then I felt like, well, maybe I shouldn't be doing this work. Maybe I'm not meant to be in this space. Maybe they just won't understand me. And yet, how many hundreds of positive feedback or reviews do I get that are saying, I felt what you were saying, or that really meant something, or you made me think? So when we're deciding to step into these spaces and share and be vulnerable, we really have to take account. Am I even capable of this? Am I capable of accepting this negative response? Because there will always be a negative response. There will always be someone who doesn't agree or doesn't think you said it the way that you should have, or, oh, you said too many times, so you're not a speaker. You can't possibly be professional if you're using filler words like that. And yet this is an hour of my life. This is a fragment of who I am and what I represent. And it's so critical in this space and time for you all to get the information, but also understand that you don't have the full picture of me. You can't possibly. We have to start understanding that when we are giving feedback, we are telling people who we think they are sometimes. And those who are reading that feedback or taking that in, and sometimes they're losing themselves in it as well. If we're not fully aware of these consequences, are we really capable of understanding whether or not we're even ready to step in? Also, when we're talking about storytelling, there's so many different elements of things that happen all the time in spaces where we don't always talk about it because we haven't necessarily built a field where professionals or individuals or groups who have lived experience can come together and share these experiences. I can't tell you how many times I've shared a personal story that was me and one other person in my life. And I stood on stage and I told you all of these different elements and it was compelling. And then after, someone said, can I use your story in my own speech? What do I say to that? How do I tell you no? And how are you going to use my information without me in it? That's a key concept when it comes to lived experience, right? Nothing without us. So I think there are these elements of things that happen time and again in this space that we simply aren't highlighting in ways that we need to. And I can tell you that as a young individual, when it came to trying to work in the field of suicide prevention, there was an expectation that I would simply share my story over and over and over again. And there were days where I did it back to back to back. And then there were days where after, I couldn't even make myself talk to someone on the phone because I'd used so much emotional energy and no one seemed to understand what was happening to me, and I didn't understand it myself. The power of storytelling can also have a dark side. We have to start understanding that. We have to be more cautious in how we have access to the stories of people who have suffered. So when we're crafting our stories, please keep this in mind. When people are sharing information, check on them. See if they're okay, because many of us are in this space doing these things. Try to be mindful of the feedback we're giving people, because sometimes it's damaging and sometimes it's keeping people from being in this space and doing good work. So speaking of damaging, it's important that we talk about elements of protection. The first thing I always want to tell people is be sensitive to you and what you need. I can't tell you what that looks like. I can't tell you what you should do. I can only tell you what I've done for me and what's been helpful for me, and hope that maybe in those solutions or strategies that you too can find some, or even start exploring some for yourself. But it's really important that we understand that this can create lots and lots of issues, whether it be trauma related or energy related or whatever it may be. So we desperately need to be protecting ourselves. I want to start with protecting you. So what have I done to protect myself? Well, I learned there are a lot of mistakes over the years that I shouldn't do more than 3 personal stories in a day. And why 3? Because there was a day where I was asked to speak and they had me doing back-to-back sessions. I think I did 7 different sessions in a day, and I was beyond drained, and I just had no capacity to interact with anyone. And I realized that maybe I'm taking more of myself than I need to and giving it out to the world. So there are elements of that, right? What is the types of protections that you need to build in around how often you will do this? And when you do something like this, how are you going to take care of yourself after? I had a friend who was sharing his story, and he actually reached out and said, you know, I'm really exhausted after I do this, and I just don't understand why. Do you have any thoughts on that? I was like, oh, I have more thoughts than you probably want, right? But the reality is you're tapping into a deep trauma every time you talk about what you've gone through. And how are you protecting yourself after? How are you replenishing what you need after? He was like, I just want to go to sleep. I was like, I feel that as well, right? So there are things that we experience in the process of creating these stories for all of you that sometimes we don't understand, and we're not really recognizing that they're related to what we're doing. So it's important to take pause in your process of actually sharing and just, what am I experiencing right now? What am I feeling right now? Do I feel as though I have energy after this? Do I feel rewarded, or do I feel depleted in this work? And then we also need to think about others, not only our audience member, but also the intimate others in our lives. There's the concept called privacy management. And I really encourage that if you're crafting stories, that you're considering what elements of privacy you're offering those that are in your stories. For one, we shouldn't just be using people's names without their consent. We shouldn't be using their stories without their consent. And if we are using the stories of others and we do have their consent, have we asked them to help shape how we're sharing those stories? Have we asked them if it's okay? Or are we simply saying, hey, can I mention you in this thing? With no context, no information, no detail. Do they really know what they're agreeing to? Are we, in fact, shaping how the world sees these individuals without them taking an active part in that process? And we all have stories of interactions or relationships or situations where someone did something that wasn't ideal, right? Do we have the right to shape them in a negative light? Or should we be taking pause and reconsidering that? And is this critical to the story that I'm trying to share with others? And if so, what are we really asking? What are we needing to happen? What do we want the audience to do? These are all elements of things that we should be considering. We should make sure that we're looking at what safe messaging is. We should always be thinking about the intimate others in our lives and whether or not they would feel that this is a good representation of who they are. Because whether we like it or not, when we're speaking to thousands of people around the world, we're telling them about a person. And we are definitely impacting how they are seen. So again, we always talk about the power of storytelling. And isn't it a bit ignorant of us to claim that there's a power in storytelling that can move and create action and make change happen, but to completely dismiss that there could be a negative side of that? Stories wield power. How we are crafting, sharing, and taking care of ourselves can really tell us whether or not those stories are doing good.